jump. Did you see me do a jump when he did it? I jumped up in the air.
We just gotta raise some mad money, though.
Gotta raise serious money. Well, we want to do this. We want to do this. All right?
That means he's learning who's in charge. And she'll tell him.
That's right.
And she'll tell him.
That's right. She will. She's the boss.
I've been with my boss for 35 years, and and I love people saying, "How do you say your wife's in charge?" I said, "Because I know." It's the other half of it. Their county executive has over the 5 years or 6 years he's been able to lower the taxes to the point where if you gave them 100% tax increase, and those are our members as well that live there, you would still have the lowest taxes in the state. That's how bad the system is.
That includes the school tax?
That includes the school tax. They have kept it so.
That's what I hear my colleagues bitching about, outside the city. Long Island more than anywhere else. School tax too.
It's like, have a bag.
All right, what is our schedule today?
I'm a tourist too, to a certain degree. They're telling me, I think they're supposed to start at 12:30.
We're waiting for anybody else?
Things are well. Why are you here?
Excellent. Good to see you again. We'll keep you as well. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, how are you?
I know you do, but you got to time it though.
Okay. Can I have everybody's attention? Thank you. My name is Matt D'Amico. I'm from CSEA, the Civil Service Employees Association, and I want to welcome everybody here to this press conference dealing with a legislative package that CSEA is working on to deal with people who work with the mentally disabled and challenged throughout New York State in the various nonprofit homes in the state and the treatment that these workers receive. And with us is our statewide president, CSEA's president, Danny Donahue, who's going to say some few words and introduce the idea behind this legislation, which we feel is very important. We also joined by a number of elected officials, which we're very pleased are here. Among them are State Senator Frank Padovan, State Senator Toby Stavisky, Assemblyman Michael Daenerys, Assemblyman Jim Brennan, and also members of the City, Assemblyman Jose Peralta also, and members of the City Council, Councilman Jimmy Vaca from the Bronx, Councilman Oliver Capel from the Bronx, who is the new chair of the MH committee in the City Council, Councilman Vinny Gentili is also here, and I don't believe I'm leaving anybody out. So right now I'm going to introduce statewide President Danny Donahue.
Let me thank you for coming, and let me state on behalf of CSEA's 265,000 members, we are proud to be here today with a very distinguished group of elected officials because we think the issues that we're bringing forward are vitally important to all New Yorkers, to those people with developmental disabilities, and to those people who work in those areas. We're here to talk about a campaign of justice and equity. We're talking about a campaign that really talks about quality of care. As you know, in the private sector parlance, a lot of the facilities we're talking about have not always been treated in the right manner. We're talking about trying to do the right thing for the people who take care of people with disabilities. Those workers who need to be treated fairly. Those workers who need to be retained. The only way to have a quality care system, which New York has been proud of for years, is to maintain the levels of services and improve them. And there's only so many ways you can do that. You can do that by paying fair wages. You can do that by giving fair working conditions. You can do that by ensuring that the monies that are brought to those agencies are used to maintain those workers and to make sure that those workers are given that dignity at the workplace. We know too that the turnover rate is appallingly high in these facilities. That does a disservice to every taxpayer in the state of New York, and makes sure that every taxpayer in the state of New York winds up paying more and more for services that should be provided on a continuous basis. Quality care is the major issue we're fighting over. Our legislation calls for funding to make sure that that quality care will be there, that those people with disabilities can count on those services, not whether or not they're going to be put together this week, and not whether or not they're brought to you by people making minimum wage. Quality of care is not something you can balance in a checkbook. It's something that happens to those people who need it most. We believe that our dialogue that we're opening up with everyone in the disabilities area, it will help to make sure that the quality of services and the quantity of services will be there in the future, as well as improving those things that those employees need now. Dignity, fairness, and a job that makes sense. We're proud that the legislators are here with us. We're proud that we're reaching out to the community and to those people in those areas that run those programs. We want a dialogue. We believe that this legislation we're putting forward now will only go to help those services. If not, at least it will get us to talk to each other, which we don't always do. CSEA represents about 17,000 workers in OMRDD. Plus we have over 2,000 workers in the private sector. We make no bones about it. We think workers need dignity and respect, and we're here to help and make sure they get it. We're proud to be here with the other people.
Now I'm going to ask some of the elected officials to come up and say a few words. First is Senator Frank Padovan, who's been very involved in this issue. Senator?
Thank you very much. And Dan, we agree with you 100%. I think you said it very clearly and very convincingly. You know, this state over the past 3 decades and longer, actually, has led the way in moving people out of institutions into the community in environments that are best suited for their disability. Deinstitutionalization has come a long way, and New York State can be proud of its record in that regard. However, the key to its success is what's available in the community, whether they be group homes or assisted living facilities and a whole host of different kinds of environments, a continuum of services that we fund in the state budget and local government supports. The key to that success are the folks who work in those facilities. Their stability in terms of turnover has been a problem. Their pay scales have been a problem. And what we've noticed in recent years is that when we pump more money into those community residences, the group homes, an awful lot of it seems to filter up to the higher executives, and not enough of it stays with those who are on the front line of delivering the day-to-day care that's so critical to the quality of care that Dan referred to. Several years ago, we put in place a permanent COLA, which was a major step forward. The governor has recommended in his executive budget this year a 2.5% COLA, but it's not enough, and we're not sure exactly what the path, the flow will be in terms of where we're going to get that money from, and how stable it will be, and how it looks in terms of years to come. 07, 08 is certainly something we're concerned about as the years in the future will determine. So all in all, we have our work cut out for us. I think there is a commitment in Albany. I have to be on the Finance Committee and on the Budget Subcommittee dealing with this subject. So we will work very hard with our colleagues in the Assembly on conference committees. We've worked in the past with many of them, like Jim Brennan is here today, to ensure that we do the very best we can. The bottom line is quality of care, stability of a workforce, dedicated people who give of themselves in ways that you can't imagine, and to see that they get a living wage and a decent wage.
I want to acknowledge Councilman Robert Jackson and also Assemblyman Brian McLaughlin, and also President of the Central Labor Council here in New York City, is here. Senator Stavisky would like to say a few words.
We're here to speak for some of the most vulnerable people in our society. They're often unrepresented and ignored, and we're here today to say that they need the stability of knowing that the people who provide their care, the people represented by CSEA and other fine organizations, that the person who comes to their group home or their facility or is available to meet with them, that that person receive a fair wage, working conditions that are appropriate, and that government cares for what happens to these people. I commend CSEA and particularly the people on the front lines who do the work day in and day out. The turnover is unacceptable. I know OMRDD has one of the better rates of turnover. However, when someone sees the same person day in and day out, whether it be a client in one of your facilities or a senior citizen, the fact that the same person is coming day in and day out reassures them and reinforces the concept that we care what happens to them. I too serve on the Senate Finance Committee, and hopefully the budget will that we eventually adopt, hopefully on April 1st or by April 1st, that the budget will have the proper funding to make sure that the uncertainty is gone and that the care that they receive is the kind of care that they are entitled to receive. And to the workers, I say that we appreciate everything that you do day in and day out, and I think you ought to be compensated in a fair manner for that, for your concerns. Thank you.
Now representing, I'm going to introduce some members of the State Assembly. First, I want to introduce Assemblyman Mike Gianaris. He's been very helpful with CSEA here in New York City on these type of issues.
I want to congratulate first Danny and the members of CSEA for their dedication to this very vulnerable community, as Senator Stavisky pointed out. Those of us who are from Queens have worked with CSEA on a number of campaigns, specifically in this field over the last few years, and their dedication to the workers is commendable. But more importantly, in addition to fighting for fairness for the workers who are working so hard for the people who need the help the most, is that when the workers have a stable environment, the workers get the training that they need, then we have a quality of care that's improved for the customers and the clients of these agencies. And that's what we're here to say today, that united we're going to move forward in this very just cause to make sure that the developmentally disabled community gets the services they deserve and the quality of care they deserve from the workers who care for them. So, Danny, we're here for you today. We're going to be with you in Albany, fighting all the way till this budget is done to make sure that the resources are there and that the legislative package that needs to be in place will be to make sure that our developmentally disabled are taken care of.
I want to introduce Assemblyman Brian McLaughlin, also President of New York City Central Labor Council.
Thank you. I'll be brief. I think everything that should be said here today has been said by Senator Padovan, my colleague in government, my neighbor, Senator Stavisky, all the elected officials that are here, Mike Gianaris and others that will speak. I think just the 2 points. I mean, we're here today, all of us, doing God's work. We're fighting for the highest quality standards for a very vulnerable community, serving the people that we love, our family members and our neighbors. And we're standing up for higher standards to attract, retain, and support the miraculous work that's been done by people who, if you take the time to listen to their stories, they're stories that could make you cry. People who are very dedicated to the work that they do, who sometimes are forced and pulled from both ends, leaving the occupation and the vocation that they want to serve in, but recognizing that they can't be in a position to receive the wages and the dignity they're entitled to in the workplace. So I join with my colleagues in government. We stand with Danny Donahue and his associates in fighting this good fight to the very end. Thank you.
We have been joined by City Council members Dickens and Kendall Stewart also, just so people know. I wanted to ask Assemblyman Jose Peralta to come up and say a few words.
Thank you. We're basically here today in solidarity. We're here today with CSEA to send that message that we care to improve the quality of care of our most vulnerable citizens. We have to make sure that these individuals are taken care of if others aren't thinking about them. CSEA has earned the reputation of making sure that they continue to improve the quality of life of people with disabilities. They have done it in several campaigns. We have been there. We have been there in solidarity. We're going to continue to be here. And we are here to say that this package bill that's going to be introduced in the Assembly and the Senate is going to move quickly and swiftly because we have Senator Padovan with us today, and he's going to make sure that we push it forward, as well as the President of the Central Labor Council, Brian McLaughlin. But in all fairness, we're here for a reason, and that is to stand in solidarity with CSEA, to send that message that we're going to make sure that the quality of care is improved to our most vulnerable citizens, and that is the people that participate in OMRDD. Thank you very much.
Now I'm going to ask Assemblyman Jim Brennan to come up and say a few words.
Okay. Thank you. The legislation being introduced, initiated by the Civil Service Employees Association, speaks to a very broad issue in American society, as well as New York State and New York City, which is that government contracts with thousands of not-for-profit providers who employ hundreds of thousands, if not millions of workers across our country in not-for-profit organizations whose workers provide services to the severely disabled and the elderly at very, very low wages, frequently minimum wage, without health benefits, pension benefits, and other basic employee forms of compensation. This is an issue of justice for those workers, as well as an issue of quality of care for those with disabilities and the frail elderly. CSEA is also involved in unionization efforts for these employees because we need to get them unionized. The state legislature has recognized the importance of this through, as Senator Padovan and others have mentioned, providing cost of living adjustments and salary enhancements to the not-for-profit workforce and disabilities. And so this is a very important move by CSEA, and I'm just here to join with them and support them in this cause for justice for low-paid workers in this field. Thank you.
Before I introduce City Council members, I want to recognize CSEA members and activists who do this kind of work. They do this kind of work every day, and because of the fact that they have a union, they're treated with respect and dignity, which leads to better care for consumers. I want to introduce City Council member Oliver Coppell, who is the new chair of the City Council Mental Health, Mental Retardation Committee. It's a very long title. I won't say the whole thing.
We stand here, of course, in solidarity with our state colleagues in support of improving the wages and working conditions of those who serve the mentally disabled community. The City Council has been very concerned over the last number of years over the low wages paid in a number of sectors to people who work for agencies that receive almost all of their funding from the public, including from the City of New York. And here again is an instance in which we have to be sure that where the city is funding a voluntary or not-for-profit agency, that the money we give them is used to provide adequate compensation, not only for the benefit of the employees, but also for the benefit of those employees are serving. And we've done that in a number of areas. In the area of home care, we also have to do that in the area of services to the mentally disabled. And as the chair of the relevant city committee now, I want to make sure that when we spend those city funds, they will be used to enhance the wages and working conditions of the workers, which will result in an improvement of services to the patients and others who are under their care.
Thank you. I want to welcome City Council member Robert Jackson, who has been a strong supporter of labor rights.
Thank you. These are the clients that we're talking about. We're not just talking about nameless people. These are people that have love and affection. These are the individuals that we're talking about. You may ask, how do you know that? Because I've been in OMRDD facilities, Manhattan Developmental Center, Brooklyn Developmental, Queens, all over the city. I know. And I say to you that I am so happy that Danny O'Donnell. That the president of CSEA is being proactive in order to bring the just cause for the clients and the workers. They're not there to feed the pockets of the administrators that earn 10, 20 times as much as the workers do. We need to have continuity of care, not 40% turnover. We need love and affection for these clients to help them grow, to develop themselves so that they can transition as if they were your brother, or your sister, your mother, your father. That's the type of love and care that we want. And these workers up here need to be paid in order so that they don't have to work 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet, and they come to work tired. And then you say, why are you sleeping, or why are you doing that? Because they haven't been paid enough just to pay their rent and to put food on their table. We must shorten that gap between the administrators and the workers. Most of the money comes from the state, and we need to put it where it needs to go, in serving these clients here and then giving these workers what they rightfully deserve. Mr. President, I support you wholeheartedly. And Senator, I know you're going to do a good job up there. We will do everything we have to do down here.
I want to introduce newly elected city council member from the Bronx, James Vaca.
Thank you, and I have to say that before I came to the City Council January 1st, I was district manager of a community board in the Bronx for 26 years. And we, as of the end of last year, had over 51 residences in my community, serving those who are developmentally disabled and handicapped. I'm here because I know the importance of retaining seasoned staff. I know the importance of having staff in the homes who do a very difficult job. Having them there to work, having them there treated with respect is important on a local level as well as a citywide level. Many people are hesitant when such homes are located in the neighborhood. And I think that we've overcome their fears over the course of many, many years. So I'm here to ask that the state consider the appropriate legislation to make sure that those who work in group homes for the developmentally disabled get the salaries that will keep them, get the salaries that will induce others to enter the field and serve their clients well. Thank you very much.
I want to recognize Rabbi Michael Feinberger from the Labor Religion Coalition, and I want to introduce our last speaker, Councilman Kendall Stewart. And then we'll take questions if there are any.
Good afternoon. Today, if you look at the faces of these folks here, they're all immigrants. If you look at the faces of the folks who are being, that we have to help, they're all immigrants. People from all different parts of the world. It means then, brothers and sisters, that we have to seek the interests of these people. We have to make sure that they get the best help in terms of health care and services that they deserve. We also have to seek the interests of the workers who will provide that type of service. And today I'm here to share my support and stand in solidarity with these workers to make sure that at least they get the best benefits that we can provide them. Thank you.
Answer any of them?
In the package itself, we're projecting $25 million to start with, and then clearly we want to make sure that that money goes to retaining, training, and making the services better for those workers. That's where that money goes. At this point, it'll be $25 million annually. That's additional funds from what we already have in the system. As was pointed out before, the biggest problem you have in the privates is that the turnover rate in some cases is almost 40%, while OMRDD is less than 8. If you had that kind of turnover rate in the privates, what you'd have is not a need to spend that kind of money for training and retention. With 40%, you need to improve what you have. Has there been any reaction from the administration Any reaction from the Pataki administration? At this point, they seem to be looking at what we're proposing, and they seem to be in favor. If you look at OMRDD, they actually have a proposal on their side of the street to improve the quality of training and retention for those facilities they have out there in the private. The problem is that we don't think it goes far enough. We think it has to be moved up, and that's what we're trying to do.
Just to give you some numbers, the governor's executive budget has a $17.5 million COLA in it, cost of living wage increase for these folks behind us and those in the system. And that moves forward the following year, 07, 08, to $35 million. But that's not enough because it doesn't cover some of the other issues that we've been talking about here, including training and fringe benefits and so on. But it's a major step in the right direction, and it builds on something we started 3 years ago. So the governor's on the right track, and the legislature will have to make sure that he moves forward not only in the direction, but with greater intensity.
Who aren't even represented by anyone. We're saying the system has a problem. You have to correct the entire system, including those people who are not represented by anyone. Thank you.
Legislators, we want to thank you.
Thank you. No, I don't.
Now you do. New York State couple.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen.
What's the Bristol?
Yeah, 30s.
This is about Senate.
Only worth 5
We're dealing with the state budget.
Talking to ourselves.
Again.
Taking care of too many individuals.
Yeah. Yes.
No, we love to, but it's, whatever you need. We'll let you know. Lots more down the city when we're doing
Where did Desiree go?
Good. I need everybody to wave here.
All right.
Hey, listen, I'm with you guys. I know how this works. See you, boss. And everybody but Abraham. You work and I'm sorry, Abraham. I find that hard. Nice meeting you again.
It was great.
Guys, nice to meet you. Hey, and we mean the words. Now we're going to be making this up.
Right.
All right, Simone.
All right.
Go for it.
Okay.
Tell us your name and where you work.
Hello, my name is Mary Ellen Hansley. I work at Brooklyn Developmental Center at 888 Fountain Avenue, Brooklyn, New York. I am a developmental aide and a union activist. I am employed with work with the population of young women.
How long have you done this work?
I've been working for 18 years as a CSEA employee.
What do you like the most about the work that you do?
I like the gratitude that I get from my consumers when I know that they are receiving the proper care.
And what kind of care do they get at your facility?
They get proper health care. They get active treatment programming each and every day.
And what kind of dedication do you see from your coworkers?
I see 100% dedication each and every day. I see how hard they struggle to work to give the consumers the proper care.
Good. Thank you. Start with the next lady here. Tell us your name and where you work.
My name is Virginia Stubbs, and I work at Bronx Psychiatric Center at 1500 Waters Place in the Bronx.
What kind of work do you do?
I'm a secure care therapy aide. I work with the type of population. The troubled population, the most troubled population.
If you weren't there to provide care to these people, where would they get the help?
In Rikers Island. Most jail systems. If we weren't there, they would get it in the jail systems.
Okay, and why is that?
Because that's the type of population that we work for on my unit. Bronx State has many units, but on my particular unit, the type of patients that I work with would only be able to get that type, and they wouldn't really get that type of help in the jail system because they're not equipped to handle their special needs.
Okay. Now you're represented by CSEA. Do you get treated fairly and with respect in your workplace?
As a CSEA union activist, we still have a big fight ahead. We're working on getting fair and equal treatment in our center.
Well, what about your contract? Do you have decent benefits, decent pay?
Our contract is a decent contract. The pay could be better because really, I always feel that we work with people, and we work with people that most people don't want in the streets and are in hospitals, and we get the least amount of pay. And to me, it's like I never understood that.
But what about people who don't have a union who are doing this similar kind of work?
I wish I could help them join a union because they do deserve. Nonprofit agencies shouldn't exist in the United States. You know, I have a problem with that because the big people in the high positions in nonprofit agency makes a very good salary. The lower people that really deal with like the homeless and things like that really make no money, and it's really a shame.
Good, thank you. Let's skip over the turn and come back down to this end here. Just tell me your name and what kind of work you do, where you work, and what kind of work you do.
Hi, my name is Warren Robinson.
I
work at 888 Fountain Avenue. I work in transportation. I've been there about 8 months now. I love being there. I love getting up in the morning, coming to the job. I look forward to working with the clients, working with my coworkers. I also look forward to working with the president of our local, Ms. Denise. I'm excited about being here today, and I look forward to organizing and helping our president organize the nonprofit private sectors.
Okay, let me ask you this: how long have you worked on this job?
About 8 months, sir.
Okay, and do you have regular clients who you're working with, same clients day in and day out, or is it different?
Well, we have in the facility itself. I deliver food 3 or 4 times a day. And we have a couple of clients that's there that I see every day. But other than that, when I'm out driving clients to different hospitals, we have different clients that may drive around.
Okay. What do you see in terms of the dedication of your coworkers?
Well, I see loyalty. I see unity. Those are the things I see right now. Yes.
And you say that you're fairly recently, or you're new to this job. What kind of work did you do before?
Well, I was a union organizer, District Council 1707.
Okay.
I'm over here now. Again, I like being here with the Brooklyn Developmental Center.
Okay. What do you see as the difference between the way people are treated working at a not-for-profit agency without a union versus what you're seeing at Brooklyn Developmental Center?
They don't have any respect. The nonprofit organization that doesn't have a union, they don't have any respect. With a union, you learn your rights. You learn what you can do and what you cannot do, and you have representatives there to represent you.
Okay, good. Let me move to this gentleman. Can you tell me your name and where you work?
Yes, my name is Latif Rahman. I also work for Brooklyn Developmental Center, but I'm in the community. I work at 647 DeGraw Street. I've been working with the state now for about 7 years, and I work with their more high functioning consumers. My responsibility is to help them with community inclusion and make sure they get the proper benefits like with medical and go to the different programs and things like that.
So what does that mean when you say you're out in the community? It means that you're taking the clients out and having them exposed to different aspects of community life?
That too, but they live in a home setting. It's not in Brooklyn Developmental Center. It's a house that's in the community. So our house is located in Park Slope. So it's more a lot of my guys they travel train, they go to work on their own and go to programs, but they have services. They have the we direct care, and it is our responsibility to make sure they get the treatment that they need.
Do they have a good quality of life?
Definitely, they have a very good quality of life. And it's because of our representatives from CSEA, to be able to make sure they get that.
How important is the idea of continuity of care, having the same people delivering that care on a regular basis?
Because they become more familiar with you, and they begin to trust you, and then you can also they'll be more willing to work with you. When they don't trust you or they don't know if you really have their best interests, they shut down and they tend to like exhibit a lot of their behaviors, you know, and it makes it difficult for them to progress.
Great. Hang on one second. Let me just a cell phone in my pocket. Okay, Mr. Benjamin.
Okay, my name's Abraham Benjamin. I work at Bronx Psychiatric Center. I'm a secure care assistant too. I supervise that unit.
Okay.
I've been working there for 24 years.
Okay. What do you see in terms of the dedication of the people that you represent?
It's a strong dedication. Dealing with that type of population is very, very stressful, and they're very needy. And the people who work there, for the salary that they get, have to be dedicated, especially with the supplies that we get, and we try to improvise to make sure we attempt to help these people get better so they can assimilate back into society.
And what do you do to try to address quality of care issues in your workplace?
Well, we have a health and safety committee, and we have labor management meetings. And when we address those issues, we address it on the behalf of the staff as well as the patients. Because once you have your employees getting the best care, they will deliver the best care. And a lot of times our issues come out of concern of the patient's well-being to try and increase the safety and the equipment that's needed to make sure those people have the ability to progress.
What in your experience have you seen as the difference between employees who don't have unions in a not-for-profit setting versus what you're able to do on the job?
The quality of care for the clients particularly, and also the respect that the individuals that are doing the job get. The concern for us is making sure that our consumers get the proper care. And you have to have a vested interest. And as an employee, if I know that the employer cares about me, I know I'm going to give more for the people that are in my charge.
Okay. And do you have a big turnover problem in your facility?
No, we do not. Matter of fact, we would like more.
Denise, tell me your name and where you work.
My name is Denise Berkeley. I'm from Brooklyn Developmental Center. I've been working for the state approximately 33 years.
And what kind of work do you do?
I'm a developmental aid 2 supervisor and direct care work.
And what do you like about the work that you do?
I love to see the progress and the growth of the consumers. You know, to be in this job for so long, you got to have a love and a passion. You know, you care for them, and when you see their growth where they can move from institutional setting and go into a community setting, and sometimes even going home to live with their relatives or somewhere else, that's wonderful to see.
Now, you are also a union representative.
Yes, I am.
So what are you able to do in your workplace to address issues concerning quality of care?
We discuss that at labor management, health and safety. Also when they have an audit. You know, when they have an audit, they have to do a review and they have to sit down with the entire facility. And we are there to hear what the audit report states. If there's improvement, we can also address that, work with the director, work with the deputies to make sure that Brooklyn comes out on top concerning audits in terms of quality of care.
And how important is continuity to quality of care?
Extremely important. Just like one of the gentlemen just stated, when you see the same staff that you become a rapport with and a familiarity with, and you learn to trust and work with, very important when you're working with that type of population that we work with. Extremely important.
Okay, well this is beautiful. Thank you all.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Thank you for coming today.
Okay.
Not as an example of the government shouldn't enter new fields, but that in some fields, private industry is just simply more efficient than government endeavor.
Mm-hmm.
Could I maybe well, I was a hungry.
Well, yeah, let's just to intro it. Do you pronounce your name Finan?
Finan.
Finan. We're speaking with Chris Finan today, who is an author and historian, has written extensively about Alfred E. Smith, one of the most significant governors in the history of New York State. We are speaking in New York City on January the 25th, 2006. And Chris, to begin with, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you became interested in Al Smith as a subject?
Well, I was in the beginning very interested in the Irish in American history. When I was in college, my senior thesis was about Irish Americans, and at that time there was very little written about them. There were just really a couple of books, if you can believe it. I first came across Smith when I was working on my senior project. And he was a fascinating character because although he was born poor and raised on the streets of New York City and entered politics through the Tammany machine, he went on, in fact, to have this career as a reformer. And really to have a foot in both worlds. And so he really ran against the grain of the Irish politicians that you read about, in the end of the 19th century and the early 20th century. So he was unusual. And then when I decided to go to graduate school, and I was looking for a PhD topic, again, there was no full biography of him, even though he was the first Catholic to run for president on a major party ticket. And so graduate school students are always hungry for things that haven't been written about. And that's how I started.
Now, why was it that no biography had really been produced?
Well, there are a couple of problems. Smith presents a couple of problems. One is that he had to leave school in 8th grade, which was the last primary grade, but right before graduation because of the death of his father. He had to go to work to support his family, and he was never able to pursue education beyond the 8th grade. So he was not, a well-lettered man, in one, so to speak. And he, as opposed to Franklin Roosevelt, who wrote letters from a young age on, he never wrote any letters. So there was no correspondence really in the Smith, or very little personal correspondence in the Smith papers in Albany. And that's always discouraging to a historian because it means that you've really got to work very hard to try to put the story together, and that you're always guessing to some extent because you don't have the internal monologue of you don't have the guy expressing himself directly about his feelings. So that was discouraging. Although when I started my research, I started bumping into people who were working on Smith, and including a professor at SUNY Albany who has not yet published, but I think probably will in the not too distant future, a book that he's been working on now for 20 years.
Who's that?
Robert Wesser.
Okay. I know nothing about it. No,
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah, he's a
person to follow up with.
Yeah, he is. I mean, he's done a lot on the Democratic Party in the Progressive era, and which again was kind of an understudied topic. And but then, as these things go, just a year before my book came out, another biography was published. So, we all recognized that, that this was a great topic, but it took a while to get it done.
And just so we get it down as part of this this interview, just tell us the full title of the book and who it's published by.
It's called Alfred E. Smith, The Happy Warrior, and it's Hill and Wang brought it out in 2002.
Okay, very good. So to begin with then, where did Al Smith come from? What was his background?
He was born, as we speak here, on Fulton Street in Manhattan. He was born a half a mile from here, on South Street, right under where the Brooklyn Bridge cuts across the street. He was born at home in a 3-story walk-up that had one of the great views of New York, possible. His family, they were living in the house on South Street when the Brooklyn Bridge was being built, and it was literally built right over the top of them.
And
what was his family situation? And
well, he actually was. I said, you know, born poor, which is kind of shorthand. He wasn't born poor. His father drove a wagon and horses, and which he owned. So he was, in fact, middle class. I mean, he was an entrepreneur, and the family was really very well off, compared to some of the other people in what was then the New York's Fourth Ward, which was quite a poor neighborhood. It surrounded, of course, the docks on South Street, and it, for that reason, quickly became home for a lot of the Irish Americans who began to come to this country in the 1840s, the big famine crush in the late 40s and in the 50s. So he grew up in a largely Irish Catholic neighborhood on the east side of Manhattan.
Now, you mentioned that his father died when he was quite young.
Yeah, when he was 12. It was not. It was physically a very demanding job, you know, because you didn't just drive a truck, but you muscled all the cargo, and you were out in all weathers, and eventually his health broke, and he was forced to work as a night watchman, and then finally he died when Al was 12, leaving the family practically destitute and in real danger of being broken up by the welfare authorities, who in those days did not allow widows to keep their children. Children were institutionalized because the mother had no support, and it was really thought to be in the best interest of the children. But Al Smith's mother went out and got a job the day her husband was buried, and worked in a factory, and was able to keep the family together until Al was old enough to go to work and begin to make a man's wage.
And so what did he then start to do?
Well, he went through a succession of jobs. He started by being a messenger who would be sent out by by trucking companies to chase down their trucks and tell them where to go next. He worked as an office boy for a while. The job that he talked about a lot in his political career was the year that he spent at the Fulton Fish Market, learning the fish business, which was another very demanding job, a 12-hour-a-day job, and 6 days a week. And but he eventually moved on. He and was carrying pipe in Brooklyn when he finally began to get political work.
And so how did that come about, and what was he doing? Hold on. Door's open. Okay. That goes to Val.
Yeah. He actually entered politics through his social connections in the neighborhood. He was recognized. He had no desire originally for a political career. He really was stage struck, and living on the Lower East Side, he was in short walking distance from the Bowery, which was the major popular entertainment district in New York at that time, and theater was frequently an avenue of upward mobility for immigrants who did all kinds of acts. They sang, they danced, they did knock-around comedy, and he grew up in these theaters and in the dime museums, and he had a great facility for learning lines. He had a photographic memory. He had a big, booming voice that carried to the last row of the biggest theaters, and he loved to sing and dance, even though he did not sound particularly good, because he had this deep, throaty voice, and which later would be described as gravelly. And but he he became a great favorite in his neighborhood in doing amateur theatrics, and but these were some of the same talents that appealed to politicians. That meant that he could stand up and make a speech and be heard over the horse cars, on Broadway, and his memory, of course, his photographic memory is the kind of memory that politicians need, so that they can greet everybody on a first name basis, and he was taken under the wing of a bachelor in the neighborhood who introduced him to Tom Foley, who was a bar owner, who eventually became the district leader on the Lower East Side for the 4th Ward. And it was Foley who sent him to Albany in 1903 as an assemblyman. So, the difference between a career in theater and the career in politics, for him, really hinged on his need to support his mother and his sister. He couldn't risk not getting paid. He couldn't take a chance that, because he had his family supporting him or depending on him, and so he entered politics, which was a steadier paying job.
So he goes to Albany in 1903. Did he distinguish himself in the state legislature?
It was hard for a Democrat to distinguish himself in the state legislature. The state legislature was, in both houses, a overwhelmingly Republican show. And Smith's first year in the assembly, he said he was so far from the speaker's well that he could barely see what was happening down there, and didn't even meet the speaker until the very end of the session. Not only was he a Democrat, but he was a Democrat from New York City, which was even lower than, it was the lowest you could be, and they were powerless, and so he didn't even get a committee assignment his first couple of years in the legislature, because there was nobody to sponsor him, and it was a pretty miserable experience for him. It was also very hard to follow what was going on. A lot of things were, the procedure was hard to see through, and after a couple of years, he told Tom Foley that he wanted to give up the whole thing and come home and get a job in the city administration, maybe in the building department, and just make a comfortable living. Was all he was after. But Foley told him to persevere, that his talents would eventually distinguish him, and that was true. And it was also a time of change, a lot of political change. This was the real heart of the progressive era, and it shook up Albany very profoundly, and led to changes that were ultimately to benefit his career.
So tell me then, so he goes back to the legislature, he's kind of putting his nose to the grindstone and working away in obscurity. What changes that?
Well, he has, one of his other talents is that he has a great talent for acquiring friends. And one of the friends that he acquires is the speaker, one of the Republican speakers, James Wadsworth, who appoints him to a couple of committees and allows him to at least begin to do some interesting work up there instead of just being an onlooker. But it is in fact the Democratic victory in 1910 that really propels him to the top, and he becomes first in 1910 the majority leader, and then the next year he becomes speaker, and he identifies himself with even though he is a Tammany man and he is seen as a, as a representative of the machine, he identifies himself with the progressive movement. He makes friends with the reformers. He befriends a reformer named Francis Perkins, and knows all the reformers and listens to them. I mean, he doesn't just pay lip service to reform. He's a thoughtful guy. His mind does not, kind of run in the normal. And he was an unusual. He had unusual ability to see things in a different way than other people, and the reformers are, constantly appealing to him, and so. So when kind of the reform movement peaks or reaches a critical turning point in 1911, when the Triangle Fire kind of turns the state upside down, he's in a position of prominence. He's in a position of, of familiarity with people. Reformers who understand, perhaps even better than he does, as somebody who was born in the city, what's going on in industry, and he has this open mind, and these things come together, to really help thrust him into the leadership of the progressive movement.
When you talk about the progressive movement and the reformers, can you give us some idea of what was happening that created so many different groups that were dedicated to reform, and what kind of scale were we talking about in terms of the types and number of groups?
Well, it was a very it was a vast movement in the sense that it was very broad and surprisingly deep, considering that it didn't have a precipitating incident like the Depression. I mean, the reforms of the New Deal, were propelled by the Depression, but the progressive period doesn't really grow out of that same kind of crisis. There is a crisis, which is that that capitalism, which has been triumphant, in the United States throughout the 18th century and has really had its way without any kind of government check, has finally created so many problems. Unregulated economic growth has created so many problems that people begin to ask what government can do, to regulate that growth and to preserve the wonderful gain in prosperity that capitalism brings, but to try to restrain the exploitation of workers, the despoiling of the environment, the corruption of politics. The progressive movement tries to address, all those issues, and the way it does is to advocate, strengthening government as a buffer between the public and capitalism, and so this is, and this is, and to some extent, this is an attack on the very machine politics that Smith grows out of. Tammany is the machine that controls New York City is a favorite target of the reformers, and but it's really much broader than just just an attack on political machines. It's an effort to really rethink the requirements of democracy in an industrial age. It's an effort to restore democracy, to limit the power of the monopolists and the Rockefellers, and to restore a fair political system.
Now, who were some of the significant leaders in New York? I mean, you mentioned Frances Perkins earlier, which is a name I think would be familiar to a lot of our folks. But who were some of the others of that era?
Well, in the Smith camp, I mean, certainly Robert Moses, you know, is a well-known name, and Moses really emerges as a protege of Smith's. You know, it's during Smith's administration that Moses, you know, lays the groundwork for the great park system that we enjoy today. Joseph Proskauer, a lawyer, was one of Smith's major, you know, political advisors. But certainly, you know, they weren't, we're talking about progressivism. There was progressivism both in the Democratic and the Republican Party. And certainly Theodore Roosevelt, you know, was a great advocate of progressivism, and both as governor of New York and president. There were liberal, kind of these progressive wings of both political parties. The other close Smith associate was a woman named Belle Moskowitz, who had been very active in progressive causes before she signed on as his, again, one of his closest political advisors. Very unusual for a woman to be, you know, a close political advisor in those days, but she was one of his key people.
You mentioned the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory a short while ago. I wonder if you would just give us a brief description of what that event was and how that changed the course of Al Smith's career.
Well, it was, you know, I think in some respects it was as searing an event in New York politics as, you know, the 9/11 attacks were, the destruction of the World Trade Center. Even though the loss of life was so much higher in the World Trade Center, the Triangle Shirtwaist fire involved the deaths of 130 young women, some, you know, barely girls, on a Saturday morning when you know, they made these shirtwaists, these blouses of this very light muslin kind of material that burned with incredible rapidity, and due to inadequate fire safety provisions and the fact that fire exits were locked against theft, and that this building, which was a modern building, modern fireproof building, which you can see today, these two stories, these two floors that the Shirtwaist Company were on burned completely, and there was no chance to get the people out of there. The ladders on the fire trucks didn't reach high enough to be able to evacuate people from the windows of the building, and so many of them jumped, and that, I think, also, it was just the awfulness of the way they died, and the helplessness that everybody felt about it, and the terrible guilt that the city felt that people would be, you know, were working in those conditions and could be and weren't, you know, endangering themselves to such a degree. Anyway, it kind of there were a committee of leading citizens went to Albany and met with the governor and called for they wanted a blue ribbon panel of experts to meet and to recommend factory reforms. And the governor said, well, you got to go see the legislative leaders, who at that time were Al Smith and Robert Wagner. And Smith talked the committee, and Perkins was on this delegation, and so we have her report on what happened when they met with Smith, and he he discouraged them from the idea of a blue ribbon panel and encouraged them to accept a joint legislative committee of Assembly and Senate members, explaining that the legislature was much more likely to be led by recommendations that came from their own colleagues than they were from a blue ribbon panel. And so the Factory Investigating Committee was formed, and with Smith as the vice chairman and Wagner as the chairman, and they toured the state and the factories of the state and looked not just at questions of factory safety, but also at the issue of whether people were hours, whether people were working too long, how much they were being paid, and they produced a series of recommendations that were enacted over the next 2 years that really gave New York the country's leading labor law, and it was a real education for all the members of the committee. You would think that that Al Smith or Robert Wagner, growing up in the city, would know something about the conditions of people in factories, but they really didn't. And in fact, there hadn't been that much study, even by the experts, of what industrial conditions were like. So this was, one of the early and most important industrial fact-finding commissions.
And this was a real hands-on role that he had in leading this commission.
Yeah, I mean, they went and they showed up at factories unannounced, early in the morning, and caught the child workers, in their place of employment, and they went home with the workers and talked to them about their lives, and they really, they gave themselves a very thorough education.
And there was and as you say, there was kind of a whole range of legislation that came out of this. Can you describe some of the different areas of legislation that evolved out of this commission?
Well, the initial legislation was largely related to safety and factory inspection, and it could be, as detailed as mandating that the chairs that the workers sat on had backs, and dealt with fire regulations and protecting fire exits from and providing that fire escapes be adequate. But there was a whole body of social legislation, really, that this contributed to, not directly at the time, but later, after Smith becomes governor, involving recommendations for limitations on the number of hours that women would work, and children who were then legally, at a certain age, were legal workers. Recommending a minimum wage for women and children. Men were thought to be able to protect their own wages through union activity, and so there wasn't, initially the minimum wage push was not was confined to women and children, but this legislation, this more advanced legislation, and some of it passed before Smith left the legislature. They were able to. One of the biggest problems was the number of hours that women worked in the canneries during the harvest could be, well in excess of 70 or 80 hours a week, and so some of the early limitations on hours were passed, as a result of the Factory Investigating Commission. But even beyond the particular pieces of legislation, the Factory Investigating Committee made the case that government needed to intervene actively to protect the welfare of workers, and that that became the platform, really, on which Smith first bid for political constituency beyond, the people of the Lower East Side and beyond, the Tammany Democrats, and began to reach out to independent Democrats who in many ways were often very hostile to Tammany, as well as to Republicans. And he began to build, the constituency that would support his governorship.
Now, you mentioned that his partner in this effort was Robert Wagner, which is a name that is very well known in New York State history, but I know in your book you also talked from this period about another emerging friendship that he developed in Albany with a very significant figure, and I wonder if you would tell us who that is and what that was all about.
Oh yeah, I am forgetting an important progressive. He meets Franklin Roosevelt in 1911 when Roosevelt's elected initially to the Assembly, I believe. No, I'm sorry. He was elected to the Senate from the beginning, but he comes to Smith's attention because he is the leader of an anti-Tammany group of Democrats in the legislature who opposed the nomination of Tammany tried to select a senatorial candidate that Roosevelt and the upstate Democrats, who were often opposed to Tammany, opposed. And there was a long fight in which they actually refused to attend the legislative sessions until, in an effort to defeat this candidate. So when Smith, who is leading the forces, the organization forces, first meets Roosevelt, they're really political opponents. They're on opposite sides. He's the city Democrat as opposed to the country Democrat from Dutchess County. And but and in fact, Roosevelt at that point goes into the national administration under Wilson. So he's not around very long during in state politics prior to becoming governor in 28. He goes and becomes Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and but it establishes a long and twisted relationship as they start kind of as rivals and then become friends during Smith's governorship, and then become rivals again for the presidency in 32, and finally reconcile, after the outbreak of the war. So it's a fascinating relationship, and
I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit more in depth as we continue the discussion. But so Smith has now established himself as a significant figure in New York state politics. He then runs for the governorship in 1918. Right. How did that come about? What was his platform?
Well, he had the platform, really that he had established. He had his progressive record as his platform, and he kind of nails that down in the 1915 Constitutional Convention, where he is really a leader of the progressive forces in the convention, and but nobody really expected he was going to be elected in 1918. I mean, New York was a Republican state, not only in the legislature but in the governor's office, and
what's particularly significant about the 1918 election in New York State?
Well, the war is still has just ended as they go to the polls in November, and frankly, Smith may well not have been elected had it not been for the influenza epidemic, which basically confined campaigning. People upstate were afraid to come out and to gather in crowds, so their campaigning upstate was very limited, and There was
Wasn't there something else that was unprecedented?
which was
That women were first able to vote in the 1918
right
election in New York?
Well, that's true, and so there's an expansion of the electorate, but and they turned out in a big way. You know, the immigrant voters, you know, in particular immigrant American voters, but he just squeaks through, and in many ways is considered an accidental governor during his first term, and nobody thinks they have to take him very seriously because of that.
And what does he seek to do as governor?
Well, he tries to carry his progressive platform into practice, you know, in the face of, you know, unrelenting opposition in both houses of the legislature, and so they come up with the idea of creating a Reconstruction Commission of some of the state's leading citizens, both Democrats and Republicans, to make a series of recommendations for how changes that should be made in the wake of the war. There are tremendous problems as the soldiers are coming back and the country goes through a sharp recession, and not enough housing is available. You know, no housing has been built in a couple of years, and inflation is tearing through the state, and there's a sense that, you know, government really has to step in to deal with these problems. And so the Reconstruction Commission issues a number of reports that have, you know, wide bipartisan support, and comes up with a program that really Smith will be fighting for, you know, for the next 10 years, because he's elected in 18 and then reelected in 22 and serves through 1928.
He's defeated in 1920.
Yeah.
Okay. So when he's defeated, he continues to pursue the reform movement?
Well, first of all, he succeeds in part because of his very engaging personality in being quite a popular governor, and you know, he takes his big family up to Albany, and they kind of charm the state with and so that even though there isn't a lot to show in concrete terms, it's clear that this is a guy, you know, with a plan. And but because of the 1920, the Harding landslide, the Republican landslide, that kind of sweeps the Democrats from power in Washington, and has a spillover effect throughout the country, Smith loses, although it's one of the remarkable losses in American political history, because he runs nearly 1 million votes ahead of his party, which means that 1 million people who voted for the Republican for president voted for him for governor. So they split their tickets, and that was very unusual at the time. So inevitably he is renominated 2 years later and elected by a strong majority that will really just grow for every election from then until he runs for president. And he comes back into office intent on realizing these both social and political goals that have been set forth by the Reconstruction Commission.
Who does he have working with him on the Reconstruction Commission?
Well, it's Bell Moskowitz and Robert Moses are Moskowitz brings Moses in to be the secretary of the commission, and so they're the moving forces behind it.
And what do they seek to do when they get back into office in terms of moving the agenda forward, and how do they propose to do it?
Well, they realize, and he had, by this time, had been in state government for a long time. I mean, by 1922, he'd been up there almost 20 years, and he well understood the weaknesses of the state government. And on the political side, the Reconstruction Commission made a number of recommendations for strengthening state government. It proposed, for example, that that the structure of the government, which had grown kind of willy-nilly, be consolidated into a finite number of executive departments. And even though that sounds like it's just kind of maybe shuffling paper and moving people around on paper, in fact, it was significant because those departments were to be brought under the direction of the governor. And all the time Smith is in the legislature, it's really the legislature that runs New York State. The governor is a weak figure, and the people who have the most power are the two chairmen of the appropriations committees, and the people who decide how the money is spent. And as a result of which, there is no officer in New York who is a strong voice for all the people of the state. The state is really run by a bunch of small-town politicians from upstate New York. And because of the very undemocratic apportionment system in New York, they have the power. So Smith's plan is to centralize the administration of the state, to adopt an executive budget, directly taking budgetary authority out of the hands, direct budgetary authority out of the hands of the Republican legislators, and also to lengthen the term of office of the governor and to have him elected in non-presidential years, giving him more time to work and not worry about re-election, and freeing him from having to run with the national ticket. Not all of these reforms are achieved, and the reforms that are achieved, the consolidation and the executive budget, were bloodily fought, hard-fought battles, because the Republicans well understand that this is an attack on their power. But it is a battle that's won, and that not only reshapes the structure of New York State, but also shifts political power from upstate to downstate. Although it probably is more accurate to say it balances the power of upstate with downstate. And
more consistent with the population.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there is an amazing thing that happens in New York in 1894 when the Republicans realize that if the immigrants keep coming into New York at the rate they're coming into and become citizens, that the Democratic vote is eventually going to surpass the Republican vote upstate, which is flat and even falling. And what they decide is they are going to fix the system so that no matter how many votes there are in New York City, the Republicans will stay in control. And it's this amazing debate that takes place in the 1894 Constitutional Convention, in which the Republicans admit to exactly what they're doing. The Democrats accuse them and yell and scream and stamp their feet, but are unable to do anything about it. And New York gets stuck with this undemocratic apportionment system that really isn't overthrown until the 1960s, when the Supreme Court rules in that electoral systems must reflect one man, one vote. Until then, there's nothing unconstitutional about what they did. But unfair, it was clearly unfair. And so Smith's government reforms are really aimed as much at democratizing state government as improving the efficiency of the government and making it, operate better. And it's something that he is that will always redound to his credit, and it's something that we live with today. Today, New York State still has one of the strongest governors of all the governors of all the governors in the country. The powers of the governor, and the legislature is still trying to chip away at them, and it just, they just had a ballot initiative in an effort to chip away at the governor's budget authority. That all came, from the Smith reforms.
What did Smith personally do to advocate for the change?
Well, he fought a long, hard campaign, years of campaigns, years of addresses, years of, making common cause. His principal strategy was to unite the progressives in New York State. That is to unite the Democrats and the liberal Republicans in a coalition, to support these reforms, and to bring business and to reach out to business as well, and to because he needed every bit of power that he could mobilize in order to blast the Republicans out of their control of the state. And in my book, I quote the famous sociologist Max Weber as saying that politics is a slow boring through hard boards. I mean, it was an excruciating fight, and it really colored kind of the way he looked at government, and made him skeptical of reforms. It was one of the things that made him skeptical about New Deal reforms. That for example, the Tennessee Valley Authority. That you could simply pick up communities and move them. I mean, he didn't understand that, because the experience of reform had been so traumatic in New York State. And
you describe in the book him actually going out on the stump and talking about the reasons why he wants to make the changes, and in particular you talk about him saying that we're going to save a lot of money, but it's not simply to save it, it's to spend it on better things for the people of New York State.
No, yeah, I mean, he wasn't about cutting the size of government. I mean, and a lot of times progressive reform is looked at that way, as primarily being, it's a middle class reform intended to rein in the abuses of the machine spending. He wanted to take the money that was inefficiently spent and to put it into new facilities, into new hospitals, into unemployment insurance, into things that really met human needs, and not coincidentally, needs that were felt by people in the city that were not being met. And he would say, and he would say during these speeches, we're not promising you your taxes are going to go down. Although he was fortunate as a politician in being governor during the 1920s when tax receipts were going up. So he really was able to give people both bread and circus. He gave them tax cuts and improved services, which helped a lot. But he was clear that government needed to provide more services.
And the descriptions of some of the circumstances that he talks about suggest that he was very familiar with what many of the public employees were actually experiencing on those front lines. I know that in the descriptions that you have in the book, he's talking about the work that's being done by different individuals and what kind of resources or lack of resources they have to get the job done.
Yeah, he like all good politicians, he knew how, the value of a story, that was very concrete in detail. And he would talk about, for example, the nursing staffs in mental institutions being so overwhelmed, that that lone employees, female employees, were, often taking care of violent patients who were violent. And, he had employees show them the marks, that they had suffered in, in trying to subdue people. And, he would talk about that, as a graphic way of getting the point across that we had to build better hospitals and that we had to staff them better, because things were really done on the cheap. I mean, the upstate Republicans were very opposed to, state spending, and the prisons were in bad shape, and there simply was not there was a very rural approach to what government should do, and he came with a much broader view of the needs of society, because he was from a bigger place.
Was he able to get the pressure on the legislature to enact this by these public appearances? I mean, did he really use the court of public opinion to pressure for the change?
Oh, he battered the legislature. He just, they didn't deserve any better, because they early on took a posture toward him that they were going to oppose anything that he favored. Well, that put them, in a position of opposing some of the most common sense and humanitarian changes that were possible, and so he made fun of them openly, knowing that the only way he was going to, he could not sweet talk the legislature. You just battered them, and so he was actually an example of that is he came to he was in the city going to the circus. And the legislature had just adjourned, and so one of the reporters asked him, compare the circus and the legislature, and he said, "Oh, there's no comparison. The animals are intelligent." and he learned how to use radio. He knew how to, at one point, in fact, the legislature was opposing a tax cut just because he had advocated it. And he went on the radio and told the people to write their legislators, call their legislators, and they were simply inundated with mail. So he used every tool in his disposal, and he was a great stump speaker. He was a great, a great ad-libber. And when he would be in a debate in the legislature over the state reforms, for example, the government reforms, and the legislature, the common argument of the legislature was all these reforms were just intended to make the governor, a king. They were trying to, Smith was trying to build up his own power. And at one point, he stood up during the course of this debate, and he was from Oliver Street. He lived on Oliver Street in the 4th Ward, which a very modest, 3-story brick building. And he said, "The king," he said, "Behold, the king of Oliver Street." It was ridiculous to argue, he said, that, that these reforms were somehow for his glory. Al Smith was not there was nothing kingly about him. These were practical reforms that would help, the population at large.
Now, in 1928, he then decides to run for president.
Right.
And he actually has Franklin Roosevelt nominate him. And how does that come about?
Well, actually, he runs for the first time in 1924.
Okay.
And it leads to this famous Democratic convention that deadlocks for 100 ballots, more than 100 ballots. And he doesn't win the campaign at that point, but it's clear, that he's the front runner 4 years on. And he actually asks, and he and Roosevelt have developed at least well, they've become acquaintances. And he asks Roosevelt to nominate him in 24 because it's good politics to have an upstate Democrat nominating, and a Protestant, nominating a Catholic from New York. So, and Roosevelt initially isn't sure he wants to do it. He has been out of the public eye because of his bout with polio. He hasn't made any public appearances. So, but he doesn't want to appear on stage to be disabled because he knows that'll be the kiss of death for his political prospects. So he practices getting up on the podium in Madison Square Garden, which in that time was actually Madison Square, and with his son, who's leaning on. He puts aside his crutches, and with a cane and leaning on his son, he walks to the podium and gives this great nominating speech for Smith, which not only helps Smith, but really revivifies his own political career. So then he renominates him 4 years later in Houston at the Democratic Convention. And Smith persuades Roosevelt again, pretty much against his wishes, to run for governor of New York, because it's felt that will help, strengthen the ticket among Protestants and help bring New York into the Democratic column in 28. Doesn't work out. Roosevelt's elected, but Smith loses New York.
But then Roosevelt, as governor, becomes the beneficiary of many of the things that Smith had put into place in terms of changing the government and projects that he has set in motion, such as you indicated earlier, the development of the park system and many other expansions of good public works.
Right. Well, yeah, Roosevelt says, I'm going to be just the kind of governor Al Smith was, and he's, his program's going to be my program, and it pretty much was.
1932, when Roosevelt becomes president of the United States, he gets help from Smith to get elected, but then largely abandons him when he becomes president.
Yeah, well, I mean, Smith does support Roosevelt in 32, but it's only after his own it's only after his own bid for the office fails. It's a very kind of twisty story, but basically Smith is defeated in 1928 in a terrible landslide. Terrible not just because of the numbers, but because the amount of anti-Catholic bigotry that's exposed in the nation at the prospect of a Catholic possibly becoming president is so shocking. It's to everybody, and the depth of the bigotry is, and certainly Smith was no innocent, and he knew that even in upstate New York there were areas that were strongly anti-Catholic. But the depth of the bigotry is is terribly shocking to him and to many others, and pretty much persuades him that he doesn't, his political career is over. And he then goes into, becomes the president of the Empire State, the corporation building, the Empire State Building, that opens in 1931. And Roosevelt is gunning for the presidency, and Smith and Roosevelt worked fairly closely together during Roosevelt's governorship. And Smith expects to support Roosevelt for the presidency and is just waiting to be asked. But Roosevelt believed that, that the mistake of the Smith campaign had been to alienate the South, 5 states of which had broken from the Democratic Party for the first time since the Civil War. And he decides he can't afford to have Smith's endorsement, so he doesn't ask for it. And as a result, and that's deeply painful to Smith, and he becomes very angry with Roosevelt, and ultimately becomes convinced that he, especially as the Depression begins to come on, that he has a real chance to capture the nomination after all. That in fact anybody could beat Hoover, and so he makes a late stab at the nomination, and so there's a lot of bad feeling between Roosevelt and Smith, after Roosevelt becomes president, and it ultimately, even though Smith supports the New Deal, the early New Deal, he ultimately breaks with Roosevelt in '36 and supports Alf Landon, a Republican, for president, which is just a shattering kind of experience for a lot of Democrats. I mean, that
changes a lot of perceptions about Smith.
Yeah, it saddened a lot of people and convinced them that, convinced some that, and a lot of Democratic supporters of Roosevelt kind of try to portray Smith as somebody who's gone high hat, somebody who now has a big salary and has forgotten the little people, and really destroys his reputation with a lot of his former supporters.
Before I ask you about to kind of wrap up about Smith's legacy, let me ask you specifically about another building that Al Smith is involved with beyond the Empire State Building, which I think everybody knows. Certainly many CSEA members are very familiar with the Alfred E. Smith Building in Albany. Can you tell us about that project and what hand he had in that?
Well, I think that the building is really a symbol of the growth of the government. Obviously, the government took on new responsibilities during Smith's administration, and the size of the state payroll grew as people were hired on to undertake these jobs, and it was decided that they needed their own administration building in New York and in Albany, and they so this building was started, and but for Smith always cited the office building as an example because it took so long to build, and I can't remember exactly how long, but it was years and years, and he always cited it as an example of the limit of government. That government could do and must do many things that private industry couldn't do, but there were some things clearly that private industry did better than government, and that the red tape involved in any government project inevitably detracted from its efficiency, and he kind of proved it. And while they were still building the Alfred Smith what would be called the Alfred E. Smith Building in Albany. He built the Empire State Building in 15 months. I mean, that's 15 months from when they put the first steel in until they opened the door. I mean, it was that's a pretty incredible example of private industry, but it was something that he talked about a lot.
Well, as we wrap up, I mean, what do you think that New Yorkers today really ought to know about Al Smith that may unfortunately have been forgotten in the decades?
Well, I think that Smith, even though he left, the politics after 36 for him were a very painful experience, and that he kind of experienced the best and the worst of politics, and but he never lost his optimism about democracy or about the importance of government and the important functions that it fulfilled. And he never lost his love for the people. I mean, he was never embittered in that sense, and he always tremendously valued his years in government service, and I think was tremendously grateful for the opportunity that he had to be governor. He said toward the end of his years that he was just sorry that that he had tremendously enjoyed being the minority leader. He loved the battle, and I think that we all tend to get a little cynical about politics from time to time, but I think his life shows how much politics can accomplish. And I mean, he made the most of the opportunities he had, and they were pretty dramatic opportunities. But the state, in 2006, as opposed to 1906, is just such an enormously different place as a result of government and as a result of the political process. And he has a tremendous responsibility for the shape of things today, and is worthy of the attention, I think, that's finally being paid to him, and that you're paying to him today. So
Well,
thank
Chris,
you.
Thank you very much. We greatly appreciate your time and insight. This has really been a fascinating conversation.
Thanks.
He was with us a little while ago. Danny Donahue was our president. And, as I'm reading your book, there are so many character traits that Danny has that are in common with with Al Smith. And some of the flaws too.
Yeah.
With it too, but he is just a really gregarious Irish Pol, and you just can't help but like him and he uses that very well.
Yeah, it's I worked on this so hard that one day I actually had a dream that I met him.
Really?
Yeah. And that he shook my hand. He knew I was writing a book, and that he was, I woke up with this, this great warm sense of it was pretty.
That you were doing the right thing.
Yeah. It was a tremendous experience. I mean, it was, in some ways, I mean, when I started off, I had these very exaggerated expectations for, how the world was suddenly going to rediscover Al Smith and the book would really take off. And that, first of all, was unrealistic to begin with.